There's a very tempting decision to make every time I want to get a new lens for my alpha camera. Do I get one of what Sony's offering, or do I spend the same budget on a third-party lens and get what is in theory a lens from a higher segment? Here I've got the Sony 24-50 f2.8 G lens, as well as a Sigma 24-70 f2.8 DG DN2. These are two lenses which are priced quite closely in the same price range. The Sigma is a bit more expensive than the Sony in this case. The cheapest listing I was able to find online for this Sigma was a grey import, which was still around 8% more expensive than what the 24-50 was listed for on the official Sony online store. After all, this Sigma is a 24-70, which you'd typically compare against the Sony G Master 24-70, but I think today it's a bit more interesting that we compare what we're getting for the same amount of money. Well, for roughly the same amount of money, 20 extra millimeters of reach on the tele end is certainly a plus for the Sigma. While it is notable, it's not a tremendous difference in field of view, but it is enough to let you go a bit tighter before needing to move your feet. It is the more versatile zoom range of the two lenses, but that comes at the cost of size and quite a lot more weight. I mean, whoa, big surprise that a 24-70 is bulkier than a 24-50, but that weight difference might very well be enough for you to reconsider those 20 extra millimeters of focal length. The weight on paper is 440 grams for the Sony G versus 735 grams for the Sigma. This is almost 1.7 times the weight of this. Now, the difference is actually a bit worse in practice. On paper, in terms of numbers, it's about a 300 gram weight difference, but the Sigma feels a lot heavier than that because a lot of its weight sits towards the front end of the barrel. So especially when you extend this towards the 70mm end, you're going to feel that downwards pull on your wrist. Another physical difference of note on these two is how the Sigma hits maximum barrel extension at the tele end of 70mm, while the Sony is actually its longest when it's at its widest of 24mm. Comparing the images out of these two, they're actually very comparable when it comes to distant subjects. Both are showing great wide open resolution in the center, and even in the corners, we're seeing similar performance as well. But this takes a pretty sharp turn, no pun intended, when it comes to subjects at closer range. Now, please do forgive my DIY resolution test sheet here because I was this old when I realized that resolution test charts cost this much. But when we're at closer range, for example shooting a subject on a tabletop, the Sony starts showing visibly better results than the Sigma. However, the resolution gap turns straight up concerning when we look into the corners. The more we increase focal length, the more apparent it is that the Sigma is really struggling hard to resolve detail while the Sony is holding it together very well. 70mm is not working out for the Sigma at all. I know the Sony doesn't even have a 70mm to compare this against, but I shot the frame anyway in hopes the Sigma might make a comeback at its most tele end, but apparently not. I in fact double and triple checked to make sure this wasn't a focusing issue, and it wasn't. This is as in focus as you can get on the Sigma. Also, chromatic aberration is a lot more present on the Sigma, and this comparison was shot with chromatic aberration correction turned off in the body for both these lenses. But speaking of in-body profile correction, the Sony has one more huge upper hand over the Sigma. You see, when it comes to focus breathing, this Sony G lens actually shows a bit more of it compared to the Sigma. But because this G lens is compatible with focus breathing compensation, there is practically no focus breathing visible once you turn that on. And that's really quite a big advantage if you're getting a Sony lens, because I don't think focus breathing compensation has been available on any third-party E-mount lens. This is a miniature cat riding on my slider going back and forth at full speed because this is my setup for the autofocus test. I have the camera set to animal eye autofocus, and this is about as repeatable or scientifically fair of a setup I can possibly come up with, just so I'm very sure that both these lenses, when I do swap them out, are tracking the exact same subject, moving in the exact same way at the exact same speed. Now, question is, why are we using a fake cat and not a real cat? We do, in fact, have a really fluffy, real latte here, but I think he will very politely decline to be sat on this slider, nor can I possibly bribe him with enough treats to pace back and forth at the exact same pace every single time. But anyway, here's the results. At a glance, the tracking performance of both these lenses don't appear to differ much, but if we take a closer look, the Sony is giving us a smoother focus pull compared to the Sigma. Notice how the Sigma has a tendency to pulse the focus. Might not be a massive deal in stills, but definitely could be distracting in video. If you take matters into your own hands and run these via manual focus, you'll find, once again, another unfair advantage on the Sony G. Sounds rudimentary, but the manual focus has a linear response on the Sony. The Sigma, on the other hand, is speed dependent, meaning the same degree of rotation will not always shift the focus by the same amount. How far it travels depends on how quickly you turn the ring. So for any amount of manual focus work, having an absolute correlation between the focus ring and the focal plane is almost certainly the easier way to go about things, and that gives the Sony one more steep advantage over the Sigma. I also noticed a difference in stabilization when shooting video with these two lenses. Now, neither of these lenses have optical image stabilization built in, so what on earth am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about active steady shot in particular. That's the enhanced level of steady shot where it combines IBIS as well as digital stabilization using the camera's gyro data. It would appear that this mode of stabilization is visibly more effective when using Sony's own lenses, even when compared with the exact same focal length. And just to make sure my results weren't a fluke, I even swapped the Sony G and Sigma lenses between the two bodies I tested on, and the Sony was consistently getting better stabilization when compared to the Sigma. I was actually really surprised by how strong of a fight Sony's little 24-50G put up against this unmistakably beefier Sigma. You are getting a bit more range in the same price bracket with the Sigma, but the twist here is the smaller, lighter lens is actually the optically superior entry. And being Sony's own lens, the compensation features have the absolute benefit of first-party compatibility with Sony's own alpha cameras. It's not really looking like a tough choice for me between these two lenses, especially considering their similarities in price. But I would love to hear what you think in the comments. Until then, I'll be seeing you around.